Hey guys, welcome to my channel Miss Recap. As the movie opens, we see a couple deeply in love, so much so that they despise the presence of anyone else in their lives, including their own children. This leaves their little boy Tim in a terribly unlucky position, with parents who no longer have any love to spare for him. Tim's life is made all the more difficult by the fact that he has to take care of his younger sister Jane, who loves to sing, and his twin brothers Barnaby and Barnaby, who are a bit odd but incredibly clever and love to invent things. Despite being neglected by their parents, Tim and his siblings do their best to survive. They aren't sent to school, and they aren't allowed to pursue their passions. Even basic needs like enough food and clothes are hard to come by, and the poor Barnaby twins have to take turns wearing a sweater when it's cold outside. The Willoughby kids are hungry every night, left to wait for the scraps of food left over by their selfish parents. Tim's younger siblings beg him to do something about dinner, but when he goes to his parents to ask for help, they don't care at all. In fact, when Jane takes matters into her own hands and steals some meatloaf, Tim gets blamed for it and is banished to the dark coal bin, a punishment he's all too familiar with. As he sits there, surrounded by coal dust and darkness, he flips through the family album and dreams of a better life. He imagines what it would be like if his parents were more like the old Willoughbys, who were great scientists and philosophers and always ate dinner together as a family. But things are about to take a turn for the worse. One day, a stranger leaves a mysterious box on their doorstep, and the Barnaby twins and Jane can't resist sneaking out to see what's inside. Jane thinks it might be a magical creature from her fantasy books, but what they find is far more troubling than that. Tim hears his siblings screaming and rushes out of the chimney, climbing up to the library where he finds something crawling among the books. It's the last thing he expected to see, a baby girl. His parents hate kids, so Tim knows they'll be furious when they find out about the new arrival. He warns Jane to get rid of the baby quickly, but she doesn't want to. As they argue, the baby sneaks out into the corridor and makes a mess around the house. When their parents see her, they're angry and cruelly punish the Willoughbys by kicking them out of the house until they get rid of the baby. Jane, who has read countless fantasy books, decides that they need to find the perfect home for the baby somewhere at the end of a rainbow. But the Willoughbys have never been outside before, and they struggle to cross the roads and avoid causing accidents along the way. After a long and difficult journey, the Willoughbys finally arrive at the end of the rainbow. But instead of finding a pot of gold, they discover that the colorful smoke they saw is actually coming from a candy factory. Despite the warning sign, the kids decide to go onto the factory lawn and leave baby Ruth on the doorstep. As they walk away, Jane suggests they give Ruth a name, and Tim comes up with Ruth because the Willoughbys had to ruthlessly abandon her. On their way back, Jane can't help but think about the wonderful life Ruth will have in the candy factory. She wishes that she and her siblings were orphans too, so they could have a chance at a better life. She shares her idea with Tim, and they hatch a plan to put their parents in deadly situations. They choose the most dangerous places in the world, like boiling volcanoes, acidic rivers, and unclimbable mountains, hoping to execute their plan and escape their miserable lives. Tim takes all the dangerous places on their adventure map and combines them to create a fake brochure. He sends it to his parents, who have never been on an adventure before and want some time away from their kids. Before they know it, they've fallen into the trap. But their parents are afraid that the kids will destroy the house, so they hire the cheapest nanny they can find, someone with no qualifications or experience. The Willoughbys can't believe their plan worked, and they're thrilled to be on their own for the first time. They run around the house and play with all the things their parents never let them touch, even getting to climb into a bed for the first time in their lives. But their fun is short-lived when they realize they're hungry. Tim, being the eldest, takes charge of the house and assures his siblings that they'll have a hearty meal. He sets up the dining table, ready to take on his new role as head of the household. Unfortunately, when the Willoughbys sit down to eat, they realize there's no food in the house. Tim puts an old, spoiled lobster on the table, but Jane and the Barnaby twins refuse to eat it and decide to search for food themselves. Tim warns them of the dangers outside, but before they can make a decision, the nanny Linda arrives. Linda seems friendly and gets along well with Jane, but Tim is wary of her. His difficult childhood has left him feeling insecure and mistrustful. Linda sings with Jane and even does her hair, preparing fresh meals for the children. Everyone seems to like her except for Tim, who can't bring himself to trust her. Linda assumes that Tim must be missing his parents, so she tries to handle him kindly. She insists he eats several times, but he refuses and pushes the food away. In frustration, Linda puts Tim on a timeout. The Willoughbys are surprised when Tim isn't sent to the coal bin like he usually is. Linda is shocked when she hears about the coal bin and decides to go down and see it for herself. She can't believe that parents would put their kids in such a harsh place. When Jane confesses about leaving baby Ruth at the candy factory, Linda gets worried and rushes over there. The owner, Commander Melanoff, orders them to leave immediately, but Linda refuses to go until she finds the baby. They eventually find Ruth wandering through the factory, eating an unhealthy amount of candy. Melanoff rushes to turn off the machines to make sure she doesn't get hurt. Despite his efforts, Ruth falls toward the grinding machine. But Linda saves her just in time. She feeds Ruth some porridge and listens as Melanoff shares his story. He had thought that some angels had left the baby at his doorstep. Ruth wasn't easy to handle, but Melanoff had gotten attached to her and didn't want to send her to an orphanage. He wanted to spend the rest of his life bringing her up. It was clear that the candy factory was the perfect home for Ruth. After their visit to the candy factory, Linda and the Willoughbys decide to head back home. Tim shares some candy with Linda and thanks her for being kind to them. He realizes that there are still good people in the world. But their happiness is short-lived when Linda receives a message from the Willoughbys' parents. They've survived half of their adventures but have run out of money, so they've decided to sell their house and order Linda to get rid of the children. Tim steals Linda's phone and shows the message to his siblings. They assume that Linda is involved with their parents and they must protect themselves. That evening, a company agent puts a for sale sign on the house, and the Willoughbys can't sleep after that. They know they have to scare away the buyers, but before that, Tim needs to do one more thing. He calls the orphanage services and complains about Linda, hoping to get her out of their lives for good. The next morning, various buyers come to see the house, but the Willoughbys have some surprises in store for them. They set up traps, including electric wires on the doorknob, random punching out of the wall, and sucking holes in the ground, which send the buyers running in anger. But there's one family that seems impossible to scare away. They're a perfect family who love each other so much that nothing seems to faze them. None of the traps work, and when the Willoughbys give up, they see the family running out of the library in terror. Curious, Tim and his siblings investigate and find the library filled with numerous candles that are suddenly blown out. Then a scary monster jumps out, causing the Willoughbys to tremble in fear. But it's not a monster, it's Linda. She also wanted to help the kids. The Willoughbys apologize for their behavior and hug Linda, and it's a heartwarming sight to see them finally come together. The orphanage services received a report about Tim and his family. They immediately broke into their house to investigate the matter. Linda quickly grabbed the kids and tried to escape, but the service officers surrounded them from all sides. The officers recognized Linda because she was once in the orphanage herself. She had run away before, and now she wanted to help other orphans. Unfortunately, the Willoughbys, who she loved so much, had deceived her. After finding out about the complaint, Linda ran away crying, leaving the children behind. The children were taken to the orphanage, and eventually they were all adopted by different families. The Barnaby twins were adopted by a modern family that kept them busy on the internet, but they lost their creativity. Jane was taken in by a family that found peace in singing, but Jane had lost her own desire to sing. And Tim, despite being adopted by several families, continued to run away, unable to find a place to call home. Tim was devastated when he arrived at his house and found it demolished. The orphanage services threw him in prison where he regretted his foolish choices. Meanwhile, Linda was overwhelmed with grief and decided to leave the city. But before she could go, she stumbled upon a cat wearing Tim's hat. Her emotions took over and she charged into the orphanage to rescue her son. Linda and Tim reconciled and managed to sneak out of the orphanage, but the service officers were hot on their trail. They were determined to bring the Willoughbys to justice, but Tim knew that the only way to truly be happy again was to bring back his parents. With heavy hearts, they decided to approach Melanoff and borrow his factory to build an airship based on Barnaby's design. While preparing to take off, Linda took a break to cook some oats, and Melanoff and Ruth joined in to help. They looked like a perfect family, happy and content. The Willoughbys didn't want to ruin their newfound happiness, so they made the decision to leave on their own. Meanwhile, the Willoughbys' parents were climbing up the Alps when they got caught in bone-chilling winds and were frozen. Although the Willoughby children couldn't see them, they recognized their mother's knitting yarn rolling down the mountain. The siblings followed the yarn and found their parents frozen solid. Determined to save their parents, the innocent children used heaters and lights to warm them up. Eventually, their parents thawed out, and the siblings confessed what they had done and asked their parents to come back with them. They may not be a perfect family, but they were still a family. The children's words were so heartfelt that they could make even a stone cry. But their selfish parents pushed them away and boarded the airship, leaving their children to die. The harsh winds of the Alps were freezing everything, including the Willoughby children. As Jane realized that she was about to die, she wanted to sing her last song to let her siblings know how much she loved them. The siblings hugged each other tightly and froze together. It seemed like a tragic end to their story, but fate still had some surprises in store for them. Linda and Melanoff came to the rescue, determined to make the Willoughbys a part of their family. The children couldn't believe their luck. Finally, they had found the warm and loving home they had always longed for. Sadly, their biological parents had fallen into the ocean and been eaten by sharks. But Linda applied for adoption and became the legal parent of the Willoughby children. It was a beautiful moment, as the children finally had the loving family they deserved. They could now look forward to a brighter future, free from the pain and neglect of their past. The movie ends here. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notification so you can watch more videos like this.